Salve, Omnes, I am Ruminus, and today we are going over the component of story in video games. Obviously, story refers to the idea of a story, plot, or setting throughout the game. Since video games are the most recent entertainment medium, they are often disregarded in terms of the story and as being a work of art, but the progress that we have made since the days of Pong have absolutely changed that. People are able to make a living off of streaming on Twitch or making YouTube videos for a reason, because both they are charismatic and because games are fun to watch. Many games in the last decade have been praised for their acting, for their story, for their setting, their themes, much in the same way that many movies, books, and TV have been. I will admit that we are still at a level where most games are still lacking significantly in the story area, but they have improved significantly with time, technology, and the dedication of the industry. It is indubitable. Yes, I use the word indubitable. I love that word. It is a great word. I don't care if it sounds pretentious. If you don't like it, you can eat crunchy leaf salad. But anyway, it is indubitable that games are an integral part of culture, and the stories and themes will be remembered and eventually recounted in history. As much as many write them off as childish or fantasies, the same was thought of movies back in the day. Charlie Chaplin, one of the most famous initial actors, considered moving pictures, or movies, a passing fad, and that the theater would eventually resurface. Arcades have mostly fallen out of favor and are much more rare, but many in the older generations thought that games would follow a similar path, where it was just a cultural hit that would eventually fade away, kind of like Pokemon Go, although Pokemon Go has had massive commercial success and is still played by many people today, even if it's not as talked about or as widely popular as it used to be. Games are a major part of culture, are a multi-billion-dollar industry, and have had significant improvements in art, realism, and storytelling. The story in a game is often the least important in the planning and development, as gameplay aspects and mechanics take precedence, which they should. How the game plays is the most important part of a game. Games with a great story will often not see success if the gameplay is poor, although there are exceptions. And so, poor gameplay or frustrating sections can be helped and mitigated by having a compelling story, or at least an interesting one. The story may be what's keeping players engaged or pushing through. As most players go for the gameplay, it shouldn't be necessarily the prime focus for planning, but can help make the game reach a wider audience or greater appeal or popularity in the flood of games that are released. When games were first released on the initial consoles, there was often no story. It was literally just a game. The instructions were in a pamphlet with the game, if it came with the game. Some games also just required you to figure it out in-game, but this was because space was extremely limited. The processing power, memory, and storage of computers in general was butt sauce. Duck Hunt was 644 kilobytes. As a point in comparison, my second book, which has a good bit of drawings and sketches, is 8,000 kilobytes. Games did not have space for text, for story, for voice, for acting, for anything besides the tiny little pixels that flashed. As tech improved, so did the games, eventually allowing text, credits, story, color palettes, and so on. Stories came in the games, but they were very typical good guy beat bad guy. Very one-dimensional, no voice acting, and they were very flat. John Cormack, the programmer of the original Doom, compared video game stories to that of adult entertainment. We know that a story will be there, but no one is really here for the story. It is just a weak excuse to push the audience to what they are really here for. Just like with arcades being a fad, I think Cormack was correct at the time, but was quickly outpaced by the improvements in technology. As text and voice acting were able to be implemented into games, people started to actually play them to complete the story. Again, gameplay is pivotal to the experience, but a good story will entice some players to continue. Nowadays, players expect the story to make some sense and have some sort of purpose in the overall game, which causes problems when developers either put no thought into the story, or put a little too much thought in the story, can convolute everything into a chaotic mess. One of the major things I learned while teaching and being a manager is that purpose or reason is important for most people to do something. If I don't know why I'm doing it, why would I? The story gives that purpose and can push players to do things that they never thought of, which is why good and evil options or game-defining choices are popular in development. Players want to have an effect on the game, and upgrades are nice, but being commented on how good my hops are, now that is pristine. Many games from the PlayStation 1 or SNES era to today actually had interesting stories and attempted to immerse the players into the world. This is another layer of the game that entices players to play, but it also makes it memorable, shareable, and thus more likely to sell. If the story is good, maybe players from outside the genre or people who rarely play games will buy it for the story. I mentioned before that gameplay is the greater element to enjoyment, and it is, but the story is also an integral part that must be considered. A generic story is okay, people will forget the story and remember the gameplay, but people will also remember great stories, and horrid ones. Gameplay is the foundation, and story and music are the decorations. No one wants to live in a house that is crumbling, but good art and paint can make an older house all the more appealing. I have written 2 books, one of which sold decently well for no advertisement, although I don't call myself a master or feel qualified to give a creative writing lesson or declaration. But I also wrote 5 books that I have not published since I recognized that my style at the time was stale, boring, and predictable. I will list what I think are the most important aspects to consider when crafting a story for a video game based on my experience and what established authors have mentioned. 1. Keep the story grounded and within scope. Don't write grand, massive stories if your skill isn't up to par or if the team is unable to deliver the spectacle of world-ending events. Simplicity is key. Less is more. 2. Don't explain everything. Don't require the player to hear every minute detail of the history and the world. Let them discover it on their own, especially a lot of these smaller histories and some sort of mythology. Story is tertiary to the game. Don't make it primary. 3. Keep characters alive, fluid, consistent, and understandable. Don't rely on one-dimensional or ludicrous characters unless it is integral to the story or helps with a theme. If the game is ridiculous, go ahead and keep it ridiculous. React to the world and events that are happening within the story. God of War 2 wants the player to start over completely and not be overpowered, so it removes the powers and strength to restart the character's level to 1. The game is generally 2-dimensional, but it's understandable. 4. Any tension, character shifts, or plot twists need to be properly planned and executed. Trying to force drama or a spontaneous twist will just be ridiculous and laughable. Plant seeds and have growth for any twist or changes. Do foreshadowing. Make it clear that these events are happening. The tension needs to be shared between the gameplay and the cutscenes. If I'm an unstoppable juggernaut in the gameplay, the same needs to happen in the cutscene, or you will have this dissonance between the game and the story. 5. Make the story interesting and your own. Don't be afraid to make new things, and don't just try to emulate or reference stories. Interesting can range from a unique setting or world to unique characters. If you're referencing or basing it on another sort of media, don't just copy and paste. What makes yours different enough to warrant a new story, and why would people care about yours when there's already a good one before it? 6. Any choices in the game should have some sort of relevance in the overall story. If the choices have no ultimate change or result in the story, why do you have them? You're making more work for yourself, and players immediately recognize that the choices are an illusion. They don't actually matter or change anything, and so they don't care or don't pay attention to it. Spartan Total Warrior is a game with a poor, flimsy story, although I doubt that anybody really played it for the story. The game revolves around an amnesiac Spartan warrior with exceptional skills who has the patron god of Ares to guide him. Although I won't comment on the historical cacophony that is the character, setting, and plot, I will talk about the setting and plot as to how they relate and fit into the game. It's meant to be bombastical. The story is kill, and Ares will tell the character's history. Makes sense for a Spartan, although it breaks that immediately when he leaves for Troy. Spartans do not break rank, especially when the homeland is under attack. The character has no personality of their own, they just follow Ares, and no history or backstory is given meanwhile throughout the game. The entire backstory of the character is hidden till the very end, and the plot twist is very pathetic. It's generic, it's forgettable, and it makes the final fight with the lead boss lacking any sort of tension. There's no build-up that happened between these two people, and there's no emotional connection. The overall plot is basically stop Rome, but the hidden backstory is never touched, and the scope of the game to defeat the Romans is weak. The player will kill thousands of Romans, go to the Colosseum, and kill the Emperor, but there are legions still all throughout Greece occupying the peninsula, so the war is still happening and going on. And another emperor will just be chosen. The combat reflects being a rogue one-man army at least. The Spartan is gifted with divine abilities from birth for protection, but never actually gets any of them until obtaining divine artifacts, which make no sense. The character never really grows except for random upgrades that happen periodically, and are never really explained. Why didn't the Spartan have these abilities before? The tension between the Romans and Spartan crew is bleak, and the random divine monsters just show up to beat people down. There's no real tension, no suspense, no engagement in the story. The player will win, and we know that from the very beginning of the game, and there's no real tension or satisfaction even from killing the villains. KOTOR 1 is a game that exemplifies great writing for its story, and its acclaim both in video games and in the Star Wars universe reflect this. I won't go into spoilers or the lore intently, as some people may not have played this game and there's a remake coming out in the next few years, but there may be some slight spoilers on the overall story based on everything. The game starts in medias res, which is the literary term for in the middle of some serious shenanigans. A battle is happening, urging the player to move along, and allows the exposition character to give just enough while not overburdening the player. The character is a tabula rasa, or a blank slate, except for major plot defining details, where the character knows 30 million languages and knows how to use pretty much any weapon known to man and can pulverize people. Other than that, the character is widely unknown both in the system for the Republic and by all, allowing the player to build the character as they see fit, which aligns with the light and dark side aspects of the game. There's no past or history for the character, so nothing that the player chooses contradicts with any previous morals that the character had. Squad mates will vary from intrinsically evil to overwhelmingly good, and again the player gets to choose who they want on missions and also how they respond to the criticisms from the squad mates. The squad mates are influenced by the player to loosen up a bit towards evilation or goodnessity, but they will still stick to their intrinsic morals. Once the plot twist is revealed, one squad mate is particularly upset and may permanently leave based on how the player acted throughout the game. But most of the others may be convinced towards either the light or dark side. All of the characters' changes feel fluid and the player's choices feel valid and useful. The plot twist is integrated into all the major dialogue and story events that all the players will experience despite whatever choices they make in the game, and the player's actions all make sense based on the little backstory that is given and what the player chooses. The grand plot is explained in a sensible manner and is understandable given the history as the plot unfolds. The main character's powers are explained, and the gauntlet of enemies at the end makes sense, as did the overwhelming power of the final boss. Overall, the story is not entirely pivotal to the enjoyment or engagement, but it does help keep players interested when the gameplay is frustrating or stagnating. It can pull players into the game who would otherwise never play, and can get the general populace talking about the game with an interesting story, which helps, word of mouth. Advertisement is great. Trying to create a story that doesn't match the gameplay, that tries too hard to push a message or character traits, that has weak tension or plot twists, can pull players out of the story and start to skip it. Focus on making what you know, what your team can flesh out within the game, and make it interesting and unique. What separates your story world apart from the games that you are emulating or from the worlds of other games within the same genre. If implementing choices and paths into the game, ensure that they have weight and change into the world. Even if all options have the same outcome, there should be some sort of reaction or change in the game somewhere. It should have some sort of impact. I wrote 200 pages of script for my game, but only about 30 are mandatory. Don't force the world into the player. Even if they had fun for 30 minutes, you succeeded. Let them remember the game fondly. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. If you have any constructive criticism, things that you think that I missed, things that you think that I got wrong, or games that you believe emulate good, bad, or maybe in the middle range for stories, please put them in the comment section below so we can continue this discourse. Next week, we will continue on with the component of music in video games, but until then, I'll see you guys next time. Wale te omnes.